Welcome to Module 01 of 12 of the CipherVibe Cybersecurity for Beginners course. Today we will make security foundations, ethics, and safe labs understandable, practical, and connected to the rest of your learning path. Security begins with understanding what matters, what could cause harm, and which safeguards change the likelihood or impact. Ethics and authorization are technical requirements because an uncontrolled test can create the same damage as an attack. The purpose of this lesson is not to memorize a collection of terms. It is to build a mental model you can apply when tools, platforms, and threats change. We will define the core ideas, walk through a repeatable defensive workflow, examine mistakes that frequently mislead beginners, design useful safeguards, and finish with a safe portfolio exercise. Throughout the course, remember that security work begins with authorization, scope, and evidence. Use the exercises only on local systems you own or environments you have explicit written permission to assess. Pause when you need to. Write concepts in your own words, record observations, and distinguish what the evidence proves from what you are merely assuming. That habit is more valuable than rushing through another tool demonstration. Start with 4 concepts that provide the vocabulary for security foundations, ethics, and safe labs. First, an asset is anything valuable, including data, credentials, systems, money, reputation, and the ability to operate. Second, a threat can exploit or trigger a vulnerability, but risk depends on exposure, likelihood, impact, and existing controls. Third, preventive, detective, responsive, and recovery controls address different parts of a loss scenario. Fourth, trust boundaries show where identity, data, or control moves between contexts with different assumptions. Do not study these as isolated definitions. Ask which asset or business service is involved, where the relevant trust boundary sits, which identity performs the action, and what reliable evidence would show that the control worked. Security reasoning is a chain. Source evidence supports an observation. The observation supports a conclusion. The conclusion informs a proportionate decision. The decision has an owner, an expected result, and a way to verify it. When any link is missing, say so. A professional explanation can include uncertainty without becoming vague. For example, a network record may prove that 2 addresses communicated, but it may not prove which human initiated the action or whether the content was malicious. Use diagrams whenever a relationship is difficult to explain in a sentence. Mark identities, systems, data flows, boundaries, and controls. A simple, accurate diagram is more useful than a crowded picture that implies knowledge you do not have. Now turn the mental model into a repeatable workflow. First, define a fictional small business, its critical services, users, data, suppliers, and operational dependencies. Second, identify realistic threat events without assuming every threat is equally likely or important. Third, map weaknesses and trust boundaries that allow each event to affect an asset. Fourth, select layered safeguards and document what each control prevents, detects, or helps recover. Fifth, record remaining risk, accountable owners, assumptions, and evidence needed to improve confidence. Before acting, define the objective, scope, owner, and success condition. Collect the smallest amount of trustworthy evidence needed to understand the situation. Preserve timestamps and sources so another person can follow your reasoning. Priorities should be explainable. Consider exposure, identity and privilege, sensitive data, business importance, exploit conditions, existing safeguards, reversibility, and confidence. A dramatic label should never replace that analysis. The workflow does not end when a command succeeds, a ticket closes, or a dashboard turns green. Verify the new state with fresh evidence. Check for recurrence and for side effects introduced by the change. Document the result in plain language: what you observed, what you concluded, what you changed, who approved it, what evidence confirms the outcome, and what uncertainty remains. This disciplined loop, observe, interpret, decide, act, verify, and learn, appears in every cybersecurity specialty. Understanding failure modes will protect you from attractive but unreliable shortcuts. First, confusing a vulnerability score with business risk produces poor priorities. Second, ignoring availability and recovery creates programs focused only on secrecy. Third, treating internal networks or employees as automatically trustworthy hides important boundaries. Fourth, testing public systems without written authorization can cause damage and legal exposure. Fifth, a threat model that never changes becomes detached from architecture and business reality. These mistakes often share one cause: confusing an available signal with a complete explanation. A tool can report a finding, a successful action, or a score while important scope, context, ownership, and verification remain missing. Avoid absolute claims. Words such as secure, compromised, fixed, and compliant require scope and evidence. Prefer precise statements such as, "This control blocked the tested path under these conditions," or, "The available records show this identity used the service," but do not identify the human operator. Also resist copying commands without understanding their inputs, outputs, permissions, and side effects. Run one controlled change at a time and record what happened. If an exercise does not behave as expected, that is useful evidence. Stop, inspect the environment, revise the hypothesis, and explain the difference. Good security work is not a performance of certainty, it is careful reasoning under imperfect information. Reliable security uses layers because no single control can prevent every failure. First, write explicit scope and authorization before every exercise. Second, separate vulnerable labs from personal files, home devices, and public networks. Third, use the confidentiality, integrity, and availability model to test coverage. Fourth, assign owners and validation evidence to important safeguards. Fifth, review threat models after material changes, incidents, and new dependencies. For each important risk, ask 5 questions. What makes the event less likely? What evidence would reveal it? Who can contain it? How will trustworthy operation be restored? Who owns the decision and accepts remaining risk? Least privilege applies to people, applications, devices, automation, data stores, and administrators. Access should be scoped, separated, monitored, reviewed, and removed when it is no longer needed. Every important control needs a test strategy. Include representative normal activity, negative cases, misuse, dependency failure, and rollback. A written policy is not evidence that a technical or operational control works. Design for humans. A safeguard that is impossible to use correctly will be bypassed. Provide safe defaults, understandable messages, usable recovery, and clear escalation. Finally, preserve the evidence trail from observation through decision, action, and verification. That history supports investigations, audits, lessons learned, and honest measurement. Finish the lesson by creating a portfolio artifact rather than merely watching another explanation. First, create an isolated virtualization environment and use only fake accounts and data. Second, write a one-page threat model for a small online retailer. Third, mark assets, trust boundaries, threat events, vulnerabilities, and controls. Fourth, review the model from the perspectives of operations, customers, and an attacker. Fifth, present the top 3 risks and explain why they deserve attention first. Keep the work bounded. Use local systems, fake data, and environments you own or are explicitly authorized to assess. Record the objective, environment, actions, observations, screenshots, errors, conclusions, and limitations. Useful measures for this topic include authorized scope, critical asset coverage, clear trust boundaries, control to risk traceability, and quality of remaining risk explanation. A useful measure has a precise definition, a trustworthy source, an owner, a review frequency, and a known limitation. Ask someone unfamiliar with the exercise to review your artifact. Can they understand the system, the evidence, the decision, and the remaining uncertainty without watching you perform the lab? When the answer is yes, you have created more than notes. You have evidence of professional reasoning and communication. Continue with the next module in the Cybersecurity for Beginners playlist and use the complete written curriculum at cyphervibe.com/news. CipherVibe is operated by Cloudsectech LLC. This video is general education, not legal, compliance, financial, or incident response advice. Never access, scan, or test a system without its owner's explicit written authorization.